talking about Cottage Garden. So let's just hope that my abilities to play a board game about gardening are a little bit better than my abilities to keep a garden. As you can see, it's just a little bit messy here and there. Looks really pretty. Fortunately, the last people in this house did quite a bit of good work on the garden. Alright, so in Cottage Garden, you're going to be building a flower bed, and basically your flower bed is going to have some pre-printed things on it. So let's take a look at one of the flower beds. You've got orange flower pots, and then you have these cloches, garden cloches, kind of like covered plants or something. Anyway, for whatever reason, they correspond to the color blue. But the whole point of the game is to try to cover up as many spaces as you can so that all of the blank spaces are filled without covering up any of those spaces that have pre-printed things on them. So you're going to get to move up your point counters for each of these that you're able to surround without covering. So if you've played Feast for Odin, it's kind of similar to what you do in Feast for Odin. Alright, so anyway, how are you going to get these tiles? These garden tiles are all going to be on this board, and basically this little gardener die will run around the outside, and then whenever you complete an entire loop, you're going to move it up one, and then that's going to count how many rounds you have until the game ends. So, when it is your turn, you're able to select any from the row that you are in, and if, for example, the row had only 1 or 0 left in it, you would then refill it, and that's what they call the garden path is for. You have this little wheelbarrow that signifies you're supposed to start taking it from that and fill up onto the board. So you do have an idea. You can see what stuff is going to be coming up next if you want to make your plans based on that. And really where you're able to be very strategic in this game is the specifically that you can see, well, I'm going to get this row, and if I'm playing a 2-player game, I'll get this row, and I'll get to choose from this row. And then up here, I'll get to choose from this row, and so I'll kind of know in the future what tiles I have at my disposal. So I can make that sort of a choice whenever it's my turn based on what I think I'm going to be able to get in future rounds. Now, let's go back over here to what an actual flower bed looks like. And the flower beds here, as you can see, I've got one that's totally open. They're double-sided, and that's just because whenever you finish one, you will put it back in the available. There's always one flower bed left aside, and whenever you finish one, you'll flip it over, and then that becomes the next available one for whoever finishes their next flower bed. So you're kind of cycling through the different sides, and really they're not that terribly different from one another. They just are different stuff in different spots. So let's take a look here at this flower bed. It's right about to be finished, and I kind of had it set up so that we could move this, and if you see, there's everything here has been totally covered in except for this one little spot. Now, in the game, you are actually given these tokens, which are cats, and you'd be able to take a cat for free on your turn and cover it up. So I don't even actually have to take anything. I could just complete this one by placing a cat here. But if I take a look here at what is at my disposal on this track over here, it is actually better for me to take one of these, even though it's only a single spot. That is a really tough to get. The blue, the garden clutches are tougher to get than the oranges, so I'll definitely take one of those for my turn, and then I've completed it. So your turns are really simple. All you do is take a single tile from your available 4, or you can, if you don't want to do one of those, you can just take a flower pot, which is always available to you, covers up one spot, and counts as one of the orange points. This is a little bit better, though, because the blue points are a little bit tougher to get. So now that I've finished this, I count up how many orange spots there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I move any of my orange cubes that many spots up. If I already had an orange cube that was up, I could choose to either select it or one of the ones that's down here. There's a bonus for getting all 3 of your orange cubes off the start space, as well as a bonus for crossing a red line, which is right here after the 6th spot for each. And when I cross that, I get to take another cat, which has to be placed immediately because you have a limit of 2. So basically, what you're going to be doing is trying to get as many little orange and blue things surrounded so that you can move up strategically your cube that's going to get you the best effect for what you want right now. The first person to complete a cube not only you get like a bonus 5 points for finishing off for getting to the 20. And also, you're going to get to take a flower pot if you are the first person, actually not a flower pot, a beehive, if you are the very first person to get your cube up here. And the beehives are actually in decreasing. You have a 2 and then a 1, and then anything after that, nobody gets any points. So when you finish it, you're going to score your points. You're going to put the tiles at the end of the flower path in any order that you choose. You're then going to flip it over, place it with the flower pot that's available, and you just keep doing that until a certain amount of rounds based on the die. So you have a fixed amount of turns in the game, and that's it. There's one more advanced rule, and that's something you can do if you have these cats. You can do what's called ramble, and that's you can force the board to refill, even if it's not going to refill naturally. By spending a cat, you can force it to refill if there's only 1 or 2, as opposed to 3 or 4, which automatically refills from the garden path. It's a really simple game. The only reason you have this parasol is so that you can put this on a spot and then be able to try, remember where it was at, so you can try and see if it fits. So, Hi, and these are my thoughts on Cottage Garden. So first of all, I'd like to point out that I'm wearing my Uwe Rosenburg Le Havre shirt because he actually is the designer of this. And something that's a little bit puzzling to me, at least when I first saw Cottage Garden, was that Uwe had designed this game, and it was a game that was very Tetris-y. And I already own Patchwork, which is a very Tetris-y little 2-player game, so I was kind of puzzled as to why such a similar game would come out. But then I played Cottage Garden, and I played Cottage Garden with my wife, who is a huge fan of Patchwork. And I can tell you a few things. I'm going to use that as a main frame of reference for comparison. But anyway, Cottage Garden is different from Patchwork in some very fundamental ways. Aside from the fact that it actually goes up to 3 and 4 players, which I personally believe that it's probably best with 2. It's alright with 3, and with 4 it just gets a little bit more like you can't judge what tiles are going to be available when it's your turn quite as well. It's marginal, so it still works with 4, but I think it still is really best with 2. So we've got another 2-player Tetris-like game. And in Cottage Garden, what I think is one of the biggest differences between Patchwork is that in Cottage Garden, you're going to fill up like 5 or 6 of these flower beds, or maybe even more. I mean, you fill up a lot of these. So you're going to be like looking, and as soon as you place a single tile, you have like let's just take a look here. This tile right here, oh, this is a really hard one to place. But anyway, you place a tile, and now all of a sudden, like, wow, I can't even place this one. Look at that. I can't even place... I just picked up this tile, and there's nothing on this board. I can't even place it where I wouldn't be covering something up, because you don't want to cover stuff up. Here it's more about surrounding pre-printed things that are on your board, so it really does get you into that crunchy Tetris-like puzzle. So, but once I place this there, my options as to what tiles I could now place, basically all the bigger tiles are going to be tough for me to place. So that Tetris-like puzzle starts from the very beginning and just does not let up. Since you're working on 2 different puzzles, I think that really works well when you've got 2 different ones that you can kind of be adding to, because man, like if it was just one, you would be so out of options really quickly. There's another really big difference between Patchwork and Cottage Garden, and that is that in Patchwork you're actually building an engine out of like your buttons, whereas in Cottage Garden there's no economy to the game. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a very light economic aspect, but it's more feels like you're getting kind of like a bonus and then able to use that bonus than it does in Patchwork, where it feels like, a big part of the game is getting an income so that you can then purchase the tiles that you want. However, in Patchwork, you only have 3 tiles that are available to you. And so the game works okay, and I can understand why they only want it to be a 2-player game because of that, because of how much you're able to impact what your opponent has options to by how many moves you make. But there's just something about like the whole getting buttons and putting them on your board. Your board is huge and it's empty, and you can kind of just put whatever you want wherever you want from the beginning. So there isn't really a spatial puzzle until like the last third of the game that's all that meaningful. I mean, you kind of want to make as concise and tight as you can, but it doesn't really start ramping up until the end. Whereas here in Cottage Garden, that spatial aspect, if that's what you like about Patchwork, it's here and it's really, really good. Now, the other big aspect of this game is the fact that you can really look into your future much better than you can in Patchwork. In Cottage Garden, you will know what specific tiles are going to be available to you on the next turn,
what are potential tiles for turns after that. That's why I really prefer it with 2, because you can see, you know, 2 to 3 turns in advance. And even players that are playing this game for the first time are going to be looking ahead, and they're going to be taking those tiles based on what they can see available. So really, like, you're able to see what tiles you can take now, and a turn from now, and a turn from now, and that gets you into really puzzly part of a puzzle part of my brain that I don't think really happens that much in Patchwork. Patchwork tends to be a lot more like, oh, can I afford that tile or can I not afford that tile? And there's some tiles that are really, really good, and so I'm like really trying to be slow to not give my opponent access to that immediately. But anyway, it's you know, it's 2 flavors the same you know, it's kind of like a Mountain Dew and then a Mountain Dew Code Red for those of you who like it. But I would personally say, if I was going to choose between Cottage Garden and Patchwork at this current time, I think that Cottage Garden does the spatial puzzle better, which I really enjoy, and I think that Patchwork it's a great game for the decision of being able to move up and manage your economy, because here you're not managing as much of an economy. But I think that Cottage Garden feels a little bit more focused, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead here and say that Cottage Garden, even though it's a light game, it plays really quickly, and you're very much engaged throughout the entire process. The only thing I would say is that you tend to be like, okay, I got this flower bed done, now on to the next one. And the game doesn't really change that much, so to say. You're kind of doing the same thing over and over 5 or 6 times. But I feel like the game still has a pretty good length to it, because you're able to make choices based on what of your score counters you want to move up and what type of bonus you're going for in terms of moving those up. So all in all, the Sallen coefficient, which is the amount of decisions you're going to be making, the depth of the game versus the amount of time you're going to be spending with the game and learning the game. Here, it's incredibly easy to play, but it's very intuitive, and the way that things are laid out make a lot of sense for helping you to plan. So I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10 on the old Sallen coefficient scale. So that's been this Sallen coefficient video of Cottage Garden. Now you know the Sallen coefficient of Cottage Garden. Join me on the next one for another Sallen coefficient video review.